Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
On a scale of 1 to 10, how genuine is Jeremy Corbyn's newfound support of the EU?
Right. Daniel Hannan.
Oh, about 2. The guy has made a career out of not changing his mind, and now for political reasons he has to find a way of justifying switching to a pro-EU position. And let's just think through the logic of what he said today. What he said was, I'm in favour of the EU, but not this EU. I want a completely different one, a social Europe, one that has democracy and workers' rights and so on. Well, great, but that's not the one on the ballot paper. If the Prime Minister's renegotiation taught us one thing, it's how immune to reform, how intractable the European Union is. Its second largest net contributor was about to vote on whether to leave, and it couldn't bring itself to make any changes. So the idea that we're going to stick around and it will then suddenly reform, I mean, come on, we've had 40 years of Brussels becoming more remote, more corrupt, more undemocratic. What on earth in that record makes us think that if we stick with it a little bit longer, it'll suddenly become more congenial?
Okay. Owen Smith.
I'd say it was about a 7. I mean, Jeremy has in the past...
A 7 only?
I think it's about a 7. And I think it's a 7 because he reflects the country on this, Jeremy. He said today he's... You don't let me finish. He said today that he's made his mind up. And I think the country's making his mind up. That's the point I'm trying to get across, that Jeremy is someone who used to be opposed to the EU. Very clearly voted against it in the 1970s. He was very clearly thought it was problematic when he was on the backbenches of the Labour Party. And in the last few years, and perhaps even in the last few weeks, he's come to a different view, and a view which is now, I think, united with the Labour movement. We now feel collectively that we should stay in the European Union. And the reason he's come to that view, perhaps it's not, you know, a 10, but the reason he's come to that 7 is he thinks that the jobs that we need in this country, the security we need in this country, the challenges to be met by this country, whether that's tax avoidance or security for people, are best met by our sticking together. That's at the heart of the Labour Party's core beliefs, that we are always stronger when we stick together. And that's why he has come, perhaps, on a journey. And I think a lot of people in this country are going on that journey too, and I hope they'll get to the same place.
What's curious is when he was running for the leadership and he was asked whether he'd vote to leave, he said, I wouldn't rule it out, voting to leave. So I wonder whether it was Cameron's success in negotiating that finally persuaded him.
I don't think David Cameron persuades Jeremy Corbyn very much. He certainly doesn't persuade me.
But nothing else has changed. Nothing else has changed in the year since he said he'd think of voting out.
I genuinely think, Jeremy, and I've talked about this with him on several occasions over the last few weeks, I genuinely think he, like many of us in the country, has thought hard about whether he thinks we should be in or out, and he's decided on balance we should be in. And I think that's a reasonable, sensible view to him to come to, and I think lots of people will make exactly the same journey.
And you said 7 out of 10 for genuineness. Do you think you might up it to 10 out of 10 by the 23rd of June?
Well, with a bit of luck. He's got a few more speeches to give.
And a few more corners to turn. Jenny Jones for the Green Party. Now, the Greens are all in favour of staying in, aren't they?
Well, the party's in favour of staying in the EU. I personally, I'm a rebel, and I'm voting out. The Green Party's analysis of the EU is that it's a very badly flawed organisation, but it's better to stay in and try to reform it because it does do good at various levels. My personal view is, I agree with the analysis, but my personal view is that it's unreformable. And I deeply regret that because I can see the value in many of the things that the EU does. But at one and the same time, For example, they're doing fantastic things on air quality. They are pressurising governments to clean up their act, to make sure that we can breathe our air, which is absolutely filthy in many cities. But at the same time, it's the EU's fault because of corporate lobbying by various car companies that we took up so strongly with diesel in the first place and started polluting our towns and cities.
So you're really with Daniel Hannan, you believe it's unreformable at this stage?
Dan and I are as one.
All right, OK. And where do you stand? Up there on the top left there?
OK, I agree with, well, Jeremy, obviously. He probably takes the view that I do, that, yes, the EU has warts, and we all know about those warts. But the thing is it the right time to come out of the EU with the world being so unstable as it is at the moment?
OK. And Jenny, I didn't ask you. Of course, the question was, how genuine is Corbyn's support? 1 out of 10. What's your answer?
I'm afraid, a 2 or a 3 at best. I do feel deeply sorry for Jeremy because he seems to be fitting into some sort of straitjacket within the Labour Party. And I have said to him there's always a place in the Green Party for him. And I think, you know, we've got better social policies than the Labour Party these days, and we've got all the Green policies as well. So, you know, I think Jeremy would fit in better with us.
All right. The woman there.
What I wanted to ask was, do the panel actually feel that this is really, the position on Europe is really about ideology, this referendum? What concerns me is that we're getting a lot of smoke and mirrors politics about the choices we have, and we're not getting a clear debate, and that's what concerns me.
And in what way? Just go on a little bit longer. What is it? What is it? Take an issue. What is it that concerns you?
Well, for instance, David Cameron, I feel it has actually contradictory statements on the European Union, and I feel that in itself confuses people when he's saying now that he wants to stay in the EU.
Angus Robertson, this is getting a bit like Strictly, 1 out of 10, but you can give your answer first, and then 1 out of 10
well,
on
I'd like to pick up from
Corbyn's
the ladies just said there, because obviously in Scotland we went through a referendum process in 2014, so we've got quite a lot of insight into how referenda happen. And one of the things that concerns me greatly is the extent to which and we're hearing it already, the personalisation of some of this. Secondly, that the nature of some of the arguments are so unbelievably aimed at scaring people. People in Scotland weren't stupid. People in Doncaster, in the rest of the UK, are not stupid either. Now, I'm pro-European. I wish Scotland, I wish the UK to remain within the European Union. But I would wish people to make that decision to vote to remain within the EU on the basis of confidence, of positive arguments, of why it's good to be part of a large single market. And here I would agree with Jeremy Corbyn. It's not just about an argument about a single market. It's about workers' rights, it's about social rights, it's about environmental progress. And I know this argument is lost sometimes because it's about jobs and it's about numbers and it's confusing. Let us not forget how this came about, which is we in Europe have been unable to keep the peace between us for more than any number of decades. And after the Second World War, France and Germany, and then sometime later the UK, got together and said, for all the imperfections, for all the things that don't work well, and by goodness, there are a lot of things that need to be reformed and improved, but we are far better working together as sovereign states, and I would wish Scotland to be a sovereign state within the EU at the top table too. But we're much better working together in that context.
Angus, I want to bring you back to the
it's not about
question.
Jeremy Corbyn, and it's not about how persuaded am I. Am I persuaded by his change, which does seem very... No, I don't find it tremendously persuasive, but I do find the argument strong. So I'm not going to guess, I'm not going to second-guess the motivation.
OK, just hang on a second. Just finish with the point. On 1 out of 10, how genuine is his support for the EU? In your view, you see him week after week in the House of Commons. What do you think?
Well, I don't think I've heard him ask a single question about the European Union in the House of Commons since he's become leader of the Labour Party.
Oh, I think he has.
OK.
If the European Union were an association of sovereign states, no one would be against it. We wouldn't be having this argument. We wouldn't be having this referendum. Everyone is in favour of cooperating and trading with our friends and allies. You'd have to be insane to be against that. The problem with it is that it's become remote and self-serving and corrupt, And Angus is absolutely right. The arguments that are being used, and I'm afraid Jeremy Corbyn did it today, the argument, the scare story is that, you know, it's the only guarantee of equal pay for women. We had the Equal Pay Act in 1970 before we joined. We had paid holidays. Chamberlain introduced them in 1938. The idea that we owe all of these things to Jean-Claude Juncker, people know when they're being taken for fools.
Thank you. Jason, I want to come back to you in a moment, but dear Chakravarti first. 1 to 10, how genuine?
Right. Before I say anything, I should make this point very clear that Taxpayers Alliance, as an organisation of nearly 80,000 supporters across the country, we don't take a position on this. We have supporters both in the in-camp and the out-camp. We actually have staff members both in the in-camp and the out-camp. So, having said that, I am going to give you two answers on these numbers, David. I apologise in advance. I think as a person, Jeremy Corbyn is a 1, which is about where I stand. I think as Labour leader, he's probably about 7, because what he actually said today was that the Labour Party was overwhelmingly in favour of staying within the EU, which I imagine is actually probably the sort of the... Well, OK, I can understand that. And the reason why I think he agrees with me as a human being, and he's at 1, and this is where I'm going to disagree with the lady at the back, where you claimed, Jeremy, for your, you know, to share your views. I think he shares my views, and I think for precisely the same reasons.
What are your views?
Which are as follows. I think that the EU is extremely... It's an unaccountable body. You know, most people have no idea who their MEPs are. If you don't know who your MEP is, how are you going to hold that person to account? You know, working at Westminster, I know just how difficult it is to hold MPs to account, and this is yet another step removed. Secondly, it's a very wasteful body. You know, we pay our MEPs... I'm so sorry, Dan, this is not a personal attack.
He doesn't want to be an MEP.
I want to stop being paid.
But I you know, just
You can always give it up.
Just being polite.
Hang on, hold on, dear. Dia says nobody knows who their MEP is. Do they know who you are?
We have, I think, the Sun some years ago said, do you know who your... They had 8 photographs, and they said, can you identify your MEP? Now, if we were completely invisible, you'd have got 12.5% picking the right one by the law of averages. In fact, it was less than that. So we have some kind of negative visibility. We have some antimatter.
It's a deliberate...
And that's because nobody feels European in the same sense that people feel Swedish or Portuguese.
Hang on a second. Just while you're on. If the EU had developed without that Parliament, without people like you as MEPs saving all that money, and had just been the governments of the 27, 28 countries, would it be better?
Yes, if it were an intergovernmental association that didn't presume to legislate for its member states, that didn't have a legal system that can strike down the legislation of its member states, that has primacy, then we'd all be in favour of that. No one is proposing that the alternative to the EU is not talking to our friends and allies. What we want is the right to live under our own laws while trading with our friends around the world.
OK. I'll just briefly finish off.
Just quickly, and the third point that really does bother me is that from outside the EU, it looks very much like a cartel of rich countries that keep all the poorer developing countries outside the trade bloc. And that bugs me. And that is done in my name. I don't like that, and I don't know who to complain to. So it's a very problematic situation for me. And for that reason, and I think Jeremy Corbyn would agree with all of those reasons just there, I just can't see myself voting in.
OK. The woman there in spectacles on the gangway.
I'd just like to say that I think if we do leave the EU, in spite of all the glorious things that this gentleman here...
on my right here.
On your right,
Daniel Hannan, yes.
Daniel Hannan thinks are going to happen. It'll be just like Animal Farm. Something equally hideous will arise with several heads, costing twice as much again, but with the added disadvantage that we will have hacked all our good friends and neighbours in Europe off by saying we want to be your friend, but actually under our terms and conditions.
OK.
No.
And you in the middle there with spectacles, yes?
Yeah. First of all, I feel British, and I definitely feel European. I feel very at home in Europe. We've been fed a load of rubbish by the media for 20 years. I think the quote from Rupert Murdoch saying that he wants to leave the EU because in Downing Street he gets listened to and they do what he says, and in Brussels he gets ignored. It's very telling of why the Sun and the other media are against the EU.
Yeah. If he gets listened to in number 10, why is the Prime Minister staying in, not voting for Brexit?
Well, he still gets listened
Just a
to
thought.
by David Cameron on
Right.
a lot of other things.
And the man on your right, I don't know whether you are friends and you agree with each other, but...
Well, what I was going to say was that Owen has stated that the Labour Party has a united position, that it is pro-European. Then how come there has been such a lack of cross-party support? As a 17-year-old that can't vote in the upcoming referendum, I find it absolutely insulting that to support the In campaign in such a divided form that it is. And I think that, compared to the Out campaign, is a shame on all that support Europe.